What's up, guys? Toad back again. I'm just going live whenever I typically would just record these daily shows. This is the daily show for Saturday. It's going to be mostly breaking down baseball quickly. I only have one baseball play. My college football video, pretty heavy, detailed analysis, I think, in that video. That's up. I put that out last night. I live streamed that, so go check that out. Those lines are pretty much where they are. I said that South Carolina, you might be able to wait and get a 10 on that one, plus 10, but that is not the case. It's 9.5 is the best you're going to be able to do on that, most likely. So that's where it will stand. So you can go check out my college football video there. I had those four plays: Army plus 3, South Carolina plus 9.5, East Carolina plus 1.5, and Texas Tech plus 1.5. There were a couple other things on these college football games that I kind of forgot to mention or neglected to mention. And I think the market still looks fine on all those games that I just mentioned, by the way. It hasn't been much of a change since I broke them down last night. I still think that the cash percentage is on all the sides that I'm on, so I do like that. At least I agree with that. One thing I forgot to mention in one of the biggest games, Tennessee and NC State, is that game is actually not at NC State's stadium. It's actually neutral, which is part of the reason why they moved it, I guess. I think they had Tennessee listed as the home team at first, which that doesn't really make sense. I think NC State, it seems like they would be considered to be the home team in this one because the game is in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's at the Carolina Panthers Stadium, so I think NC State's kind of a semi-home in that situation, although it's not that far from Tennessee either, really. So both teams are going to show up pretty heavily in that one. But that would be the case if the game was at NC State, too. I think it's not really that much different. I don't think, not that far away. But it's just, well, it's not at NC State's home stadium, though. So you don't get the students packing the stadium where it's right there on campus and whatever. So it's semi-home for NC State, I would say, in that one. But my analysis on that doesn't really change. I do think that the line is kind of overreacting to what we saw in week 1 there with NC State really struggling against Western Carolina. And they struggled more than I even mentioned on that video last night. NC State, I think they were like tied at halftime in that game, or maybe even losing at halftime against Western Carolina. That's just bad, but that might serve to refocus them. But they're up against a Tennessee team that is certainly the superior of the two teams. So we'll see what actually happens with that one. The Boise State-Oregon game, one thing I did forget to mention is that I did mention that Oregon's first game was much less impressive than Boise's was, even though they both didn't play that well against kind of inferior opponents. But Oregon's was against a more inferior opponent, and it was at home, whereas Boise, at least they can kind of hang their hat on the fact that it was a weird travel spot where they had to go to an unfamiliar venue out to Georgia Southern. But now they're having to travel back to Oregon. So that I said that I lean Oregon a little bit just because their opening game was way more embarrassing than Boise's was. But Boise's having to make 2 cross-country trips, basically, too. So that travel spot isn't exactly the best for Boise. And that one of the market has kind of shifted there, where Oregon's still public, 66%, but they've gone down to 61% of the cash. So it looks like maybe there is starting to be some take back in the market with some pros coming in, taking the points with Boise on that one. I'm not sure I would agree with that. As I said, I kind of leaned to the Oregon side there when I talked about this last night. I don't have a play on that one, obviously, but that's just some additional information in that one. And then what was the other game that I was going to mention? Oh, yeah, Iowa State. I forgot to kind of go into detail on that because I talked about how Iowa State is pretty good defensively. Both of these teams are really good defensively, though. This is what I kind of forgot to get into, which is why this is an insanely low total at 36, because you got Iowa State, who's been better defensively than offensively in recent years, and Iowa, it's been even more of a discrepancy there. Iowa's offense has been basically inept recently. Last year in the Big Ten championship and the bowl game combined, Iowa didn't even score a point. And I remember that because I had Iowa plus, I think, 23 or something like that in the Big Ten championship, and they wound up, or 23.5 it might have been, they wound up not covering because of a late, useless Michigan field goal that made it 26-0. And all I needed was Iowa State to make like one fewer turnover, or Iowa, excuse me, to make one fewer turnover in that game, or score one time, and it didn't happen. Iowa was so inept. They fired their offensive coordinator, and rightly so, I think. And now we're looking at an Iowa team that did just score 40 in their opener, which I think they only scored 40 points one time all last year. But in both cases, it was against a very inferior opponent. So I don't know if it's really that impressive that they put up 40 against Illinois State, I believe is who they played. I'm not sure that there's that much to really gather from that. I still think this Iowa offense is going to have some struggles, even if it's not as putrid as it was last year. And their defense is still going to be very good because they have a lot of guys returning on that defense. But Iowa State, I think their defense is also good, and I think they're much less inept offensively. So that's the thing. Iowa State, even though they're more defensive, I think they could still put up more points than Iowa can, really. So I think that's kind of the difference there. So that's why I was saying I do lean slightly to Iowa State there because the line's still, to me, it looks like they're begging you to take Iowa, the ranked team, as I believe they're the home team, even though Iowa State's certainly going to travel in this in-state huge rivalry game that usually happens in one of the early weeks. 69% of the tickets still on Iowa and 54% of the cash. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it still looks like the odds makers are begging you to lay the points with Iowa there. And that's still an offense that I don't trust at all, even though I do trust their defense. So I would not want to be really laying points with Iowa there. So that's basically what I was going to add to the college football analysis there. Now I'll go over to baseball, the less interesting sport, but you can still find money-making opportunities in baseball, man. And that's what I'm doing. That's where I'm going. Nate G, Iowa's still playing 1920s ball. I like that, though. I like old school defense, ground and pound, more physical games. We're getting away from that, man. And the NFL's trying to like dome more of the like winter weather stadiums and stuff. I don't like what's going on in the professional sports, in any of the sports really, as far as that's concerned. With their we're concerned about safety. I mean, yeah, but these guys are also supposed to be like gladiators, and you're taking it to the extreme the other way, where it just completely changes the sport, basically. MMA is becoming the more manly sport, and hockey is also more manly at this point. Although football still does entertain me. Something that doesn't entertain me as much with the new rules, baseball, with the runner on second rule and the pitch clock. I hate all of that, dude. I want the old school baseball back. I want the steroid era back. I mean, that was the height of baseball for me, really. When I was growing up in the 90s, you had all these hitters. Now you have all these weak offensive stats in baseball. Pitchers have gotten better, and you have a lot more pitchers throwing real hard, but it's kind of crazy. Yeah, hockey is the man's game. That is true. Definitely. Even though even hockey has kind of succumbed a little bit to kind of the like woke progressive stuff, but they haven't really changed any of the rules or whatever. And you still have guys playing into their 40s and playing with insanely massive injuries and stuff like that. Speaking of injuries, by the way, I will point out I went 2-0 yesterday. Kansas City Royals won for me during the day, and then I got that night game win on the NFL game with the Philadelphia Eagles, which was a close game. Maybe it should have been easier for the Eagles because Jalen Hurts did make a couple of pretty bad mistakes, 2 interceptions, and I think 2 fumbles. And I don't know if he lost either of the fumbles. One was on the tush push right at the end where they probably could have had a touchdown, and he fumbled the snap, which the snap looked fine to me. I don't know what he was doing there. They wound up getting a field goal there instead, but that made it a cover instead of a push for me at the end. He also threw an interception in the end zone earlier in the game, which, I mean, Philadelphia was on the verge of scoring there, so they probably should have covered more easily than they did, even though the game was statistically pretty close. And as for what I was talking about there, the injury, very unfortunate what happened at the end of that game. On the second to last play of the game, when Green Bay basically was just going to have to chuck it up from midfield, Jordan Love got swarmed and suffered what looked to me like a pretty bad leg injury. Like his knee looked like it kind of rotated in the wrong direction, his left knee. I think that could be an ACL tear. I don't know if the news has come out on that, but that looked real bad, and that is really unfortunate. It's not going to be good for football if Jordan Love is injured for the season or something like that. Hurts is your fantasy QB. Yeah, I mean, he still put up decent fantasy stats in that game, I would imagine, with a couple of touchdowns and whatever. Jordan Love, if you have him on your team, you're hurting more than if you have Hurts. I have CJ Stroud on my main fantasy team, by the way. So we'll see how that turns out. I usually suffer from a lot of injuries in fantasy football as well. All right, let's get to baseball here. I'm going to just kind of quickly comment on a few of these games. As I was running down the card, I was looking at it, and I'm like, What do I want to do about this card? What am I looking at here? I'm wearing my Red Sox hat, by the way, because the Red Sox won a game for once at home against the Chicago White Sox, the historically bad Chicago White Sox. Congratulations, Boston Red Sox. You were able to win against the worst team in baseball. Thank you. Arizona, Houston interested me a little bit when I looked at it, in that I leaned to Houston. Houston's up down from minus 155 to minus 154, I guess, on the money line. 51% of the tickets on them, but 53% of the cash. So it looks like they do have a little bit of the cash discrepancy. I do think that the public might look at this game and think, hey, I'm getting plus money on this Diamondbacks team. And we know that the Diamondbacks are really good. They won the NL last year. This looks like a kind of a toss-up type of game. Let's grab Arizona, right? Looking at the two starting pitchers, neither of them have great ERAs. So I think that could be kind of the public sentiment here, even though Houston did win quite easily against Arizona to kick off the series last night, 8-0. But I like the starting pitching matchup for Houston here, actually, because Eduardo Rodriguez, I think, is actually the worst of the two pitchers, the 5.33 ERA, 1.38 whip. But what is really kind of an indictment here is his numbers against Houston in a huge 115 at-bat sample size. Houston's hit 322 off him with a 999 OPS and 8 home runs, 26-13 strikeout walk ratio. So he has really not done well in a huge sample size against Houston. Because I think at one point he was on my Boston Red Sox. I was going to say he was in the American League most of his career. I don't remember him even being on the Red Sox for as long as he was. I do remember him being on Detroit, but he has struggled mightily against Houston, whereas, and also Rodriguez has not been good recently. And by the way, let me know how my audio is, because I've noticed that my audio, whenever I'm using Firefox for this, I have StreamYard up in Chrome. I'm sharing the whole window Firefox, but I've been doing this for more than an entire year at this point, but it seems to be like messing with my audio and like making it get all like garbled just temporarily. I don't know why that's the case. Something Firefox coming in, like messing with the audio settings or something. I don't know, but Eduardo Rodriguez just has not been good this entire season, man. I mean, they reactivated him. They brought him back at the beginning of August, and he just has been unimpressive. So, I mean, his season stats are basically also his recent stats, because he's only pitched recently. Yusei Kikuchi is pitching for Houston. They got him over in a trade, and it has been a good trade for them, man. He was not pitching well for Toronto, really, but this change of scenery seems like it helped, even though he did actually have that really bad start against Arizona the last time he faced them, which was not long ago on July 14th. So that would worry me a little bit about laying a huge price with Houston, even though I still agree with playing Houston here. But since that change in venue, scenery, he's been pumped up, I think, to be on a contender, because he has started pitching really well. Look at his numbers since he's been on Houston, even though he's only faced a couple of decent offenses, really. Texas, Boston, Baltimore. I mean, those offenses aren't too bad. Kansas City, I mean, they're not that bad either, I guess. And he had a really nice performance there. 12 strikeouts, no walks, 1 earned run, and 7 innings pitched. He's been pitching decent. He's gone at least 5 1/3 in every one of these starts with Houston, and Houston has won every single game that he started for them. They're 6-0 with him on the mound. He has a 47-10 strikeout walk ratio, ratcheting up that strikeout number. In 35 innings, it's a lot of strikeouts, and only 23 hits allowed. So even though the number of walks is a little bit concerning, he's been good with Houston. 2.57 ERA. His overall stats just in the mediocre territory, basically. 4.24 ERA, 1.25 whip, but it's gotten better since he's been on Houston. So I like the Kikuchi side here. And against Arizona, even including that bad start against them that he just had, he's been decent against them in a 45 at-bat sample size, 244 batting average, and 676 OPS. So better than Rodriguez's numbers. So I do lean to Houston. We have a doubleheader with Pittsburgh and Washington at Pittsburgh. I think the game got rained out yesterday. Not really a matchup people are going to be paying attention to, whereas that Houston-Arizona game is a big matchup between two playoff-bound teams. But Washington-Pittsburgh, no one cares about this. But we have the battle of the Mitches here, which caught my eye a little bit at first, but the market looks like it's against, the market I think is agreeing with my lean. I forget. Let me look at how I broke this down again. Mitchell Parker against Mitch Keller, but we also don't know what's going to happen in the first game of this doubleheader, because this is the second game of the doubleheader. So this is going to be somewhat dependent on what happens in that first game and what the lineups are going to be and what the bullpen usage winds up being in that first game. So sometimes I will play the second game of a doubleheader before that without knowing that. I'm not going to do it here, but Mitchell Parker pitching for Washington here, he's had a decent season, a rookie season, so I wouldn't knock him for this. I mean, this is decent numbers for that. 4.27 ERA, 1.27 whip, a little bit high, but he's starting to pitch a little bit better again recently. Had a decent month here. We had one really bad start against Philly, really skewing the numbers because the rest of these numbers aren't that bad. Didn't go that far in that Yankee game. Wasn't really the worst performance, though. And then had a decent bounce back here against Chicago the last time out with 8 strikeouts, 1 walk, 3 earned runs allowed. Not terrible there. Against Pittsburgh has basically never seen him before. Only De La Cruz has ever seen him before, and he's 0 for 5 with a strikeout off him. So I think Mitchell Parker actually does have the edge in that starting pitching matchup there against the other Mitch Keller, even though he has the better season-long numbers, 3.88 ERA, 1.27 whip, and he's not a bad pitcher. Mitch Keller has been struggling more recently with a 6.75 ERA in the month of August. He has one start in September, and he was struggling to go deep into these games, too, only going at least 5 innings twice out of those 5 starts there in that month, but he faced a slew of pretty hot-hitting offenses, so facing good offenses, but still putting up pretty bad numbers in some of those games there. And then there's been no let-up for him, really. So he has been facing really good offenses. Just faced Cleveland. Good strikeout walk numbers in that one, 7-0, but allowed 11 hits in 5 1/3. So he has been too hittable over this span. So he's been the pitcher who's been struggling a bit more recently. And against Washington, his stats are not exactly good. In 42 at-bats, they have a 333 batting average off him and 959 OPS. So the market does seem to be in agreement with the Washington side in game 2 of that doubleheader, with Pittsburgh up from -135 to -136, but very public because nobody wants Washington, really, the team with the worst record. But this is not Paul Skeens pitching for Pittsburgh. So when Paul Skeens is not on the mound, Pittsburgh is vulnerable. 90% of the tickets on Pittsburgh and 84% of the cash on Pittsburgh. Thank you, Nate, for commenting on that. Sounds fine. That's good. It seemed to be like kind of temporary. Like it would just get garbled a little bit when I was like kind of switching between tabs and windows and stuff. So I don't know. But anyway, yeah, the market does look like it's indicating on the Washington side in that one. We do have what looks to be a nice pitching matchup here with San Francisco and San Diego with Logan Webb and Dylan Cease, the ace for each team, basically, with this total going down from 7 to 7, juice to the under. If you want the under there, I would say you probably have to get on it before that thing goes away because you want that key number 7 at the very least. 55% of the tickets, but 84% of the cash on the under. I don't quite want to deal with an under on this one. Webb is definitely a workhorse and pitches a lot of deep innings there. He goes deep into a lot of starts. He has decent numbers over his career against San Diego, too, with like a 240-something opponent batting average. Cease, on the other side, has been really racking up the strikeouts this year, but he seems to have kind of been burning out a little bit towards the end of the season here. Maybe just throwing too hard throughout the season has kind of caught up with him a little bit. He's still a good pitcher, but he's not that elite dominant pitcher that we were seeing throughout most of the season right now. He's a decent pitcher, and he has decent numbers against San Francisco. I think he's held them to like a 260 batting average or so. So not something I really want to get involved in, but I do like good pitching matchups, and this seems to be kind of the best one on the board, basically, between the two. It's the one that has 2 like really good starters on the mound. And I do kind of lean to the Atlanta side as well with Barrios against Schwellenbach, Toronto, Atlanta. Atlanta's up or down, actually, from -164 to -157 on the money line. So kind of a cheap price to be getting Atlanta at, really. I think Schwellenbach is still kind of flying under the radar a little bit. He's better than people think. People just still don't know the name, really, and they know Barrios has been a staple. He is Toronto's best pitcher, but Schwellenbach, I think, has the better of the matchup here. Atlanta, 60% of the tickets, 65% of the cash, so Atlanta does have a little bit of the cash discrepancy on them as well. I believe Atlanta did win the first game of the series, but what we have going on here is that Barrios He has bad numbers against Atlanta, but the reason I don't quite want to fade him is not only his good numbers this season, 3.59 ERA, 1.15 whip, but he has been pitching really well recently. He had a really good August with a 2.5 ERA. I saw him pitch in person and really hold down the Red Sox at Fenway. Then he went to Minnesota and followed that up with a shutout of Minnesota on the road. He's been pitching really well, man, in August. After that bad start against the Yankees, giving up 1 or 2 earned runs or 0 in all the other starts in the month. 37-8 strikeout walk ratio. So he's been in good recent form. So that kind of keeps me off of it a little bit just because he's been dealing. But he could finally reach a point here where he doesn't do well in this game because we have a big sample size against the Atlanta Braves for Berríos. And I don't know how he even has this big a sample size against these guys, to be honest. I think he's been in the American League his entire career, but 155 at-bat sample size, 297 batting average, and 798 OPS. So Atlanta's hitters have been successful against Berríos. Whereas on the other side, you got Schwellenbach, and I believe Toronto has probably never seen him before. He's been pitching well in his rookie season, man. 3.69 ERA, 1.07 whip. Putting together a nice rookie season, and it's been pretty consistent throughout the whole season. He's allowed more than 4 earned runs, I think only this one time at Boston. Other than that, he's allowed 4 or fewer every other time. So not bad, really. Schwellenbach is very good for a rookie, really. And against Toronto, yeah, like I said, Toronto's never faced him before. So you have this good rookie with good stuff, basically, with hitters who have never seen him before. And the hitters are going to take time to have to adjust to him, man, and figure out what this guy actually throws. So I do lean to the Atlanta side there for that reason. Just the matchup does look like it would indicate more on the Atlanta side there as having the advantage in that starting pitching matchup at the very least. But where I'm actually going is a total, and it's going to be an over. I don't play that many overs, but I am playing the over in Cincinnati, and the Mets is where I'm going here. And this looks like it's gone up from 8.5 to 8.5 juice to the over. Public is going to come in on the over in this one. I mean, it's a Cincinnati Mets game. Public knows these teams can put up some offensive numbers, and they like the over, but so do I. The public's not always wrong. 89% of tickets, but it looks like 100% of the cash. I mean, there's no way that's accurate, but it could indicate that there is some amount of the money actually coming in on the over here in agreement with me. And I think that it's the spot to play an over in that one. You can get over 8.5 too, which that worries me a little bit that the total's below 9 because the odds makers aren't just giving you free money and they know the public's going to come in and play the over. But in this case, I just think I just have to agree with it. You can get under that key number of 9 because the 9 is what breaks the 4-4 tie. So it's just a better number, man. If you like the over, it's a better number for it, and that's where I'm going with this one. I'll look at what these teams have been doing recently, man. And the Mets, the Reds, they did play a high-scoring game yesterday, 6-4. But what this kind of tells you is that the Mets have been putting up offensive numbers at home, which they have. The last 3 home games, they've put up a bunch of good numbers, 21 runs over those 3, so averaging 7 runs a game across those 3. So recently, they've been putting up numbers at home. So that looks good to me. Yesterday, another one of those high-scoring games, 6-4. And that was one of those games where it was 4-4, so not really that high-scoring until we got into extra innings, and the Mets wound up winning in extra innings. Cincinnati did only have 3 hits in the game, so that is kind of a misleading score there to some extent. So does that worry me a little bit on the offensive side for Cincinnati? Slightly, but I think the starting pitching matchup is going to help us out here a little bit. And I think the Mets should be able to put up their runs in this one as they've been scoring well at home. They're up against a pretty bad starting pitcher, and the Reds went with an opener approach yesterday. So even though I always talk about how the opener does actually tend to lend itself to the pitching staff kind of being ready and pitching well in the next game, but I don't know if that's going to be the case here, man, because even though the Reds went with an opener with Cruz, Williamson came in and pitched some innings and pitched 4 2/3, they still had to dip into their bullpen quite a bit, man. They still had to use 5 other relief pitchers out of this bullpen. So I don't see how that's really helpful to Cincinnati's bullpen situation, having to use that many different relievers. The Mets didn't have to use that many. They used 3, but they used 3 of their kind of decent relievers. So I don't think the bullpen situation is very good for either team. So that kind of helps towards an over. And then we'll look at the starting pitching matchup here. I mean, look at the starting pitching matchup. This is not an impressive starting pitching matchup. Jacob Eunice is pitching for Cincinnati. He's the guy who came over from Milwaukee a little while ago. And Cincinnati's been using him as an opener, basically. He hasn't gone more than 4 innings in any outing for Cincinnati. So he's not a guy that's going to really throw a ton of innings for you. So it looks like they're going with an opener in back-to-back games. I don't think that lends itself well to keeping your opponent's score down, man. Even though the idea of the opener is that you're rolling out so many different pitchers that the hitters can't get adjusted to this new pitcher over and over again. But I still think it's bad and that it just kind of like burns out your bullpen. And when you're doing it 2 games in a row like this, it's like, what pitchers are you even going to have left to use? I don't know, but that doesn't look good to me. And Eunice, I mean, his numbers look pretty solid on the season with a 3.13 ERA, 0.98 whip, but still, like I said, he's a guy that's only going to come in and pitch like a couple of innings for you probably. And his overall stats on his career are not that good. He's not a very good pitcher. 4.55 ERA, 1.31 whip on his career. Doesn't rack up that many strikeouts, really. He's kind of bounced around because he's just not that great a pitcher. So the fact that his stats are decent this season doesn't really deter me from this. And the Mets have a big sample size in their history against him. 101 at bats worth. They've hit 6 home runs off him, 21 RBIs, 17-3 strikeout walk ratio is good for Eunice, but the rest of the numbers are not. And the Mets have hit 297 off him with an 872 OPS. Huge sample size that we're working with there. I mean, Lindor has done a lot of the damage, so it's been mostly one guy who's done it and has all 6 of those home runs, and he's only going to get so many at bats. So that does slightly concern me, but still, overall, Eunice's numbers are really not good against against the Mets. And plus, like I said, he's only going to probably pitch a few innings. So either way you look at it, the Mets are only going to be up against him for so long. But then Cincinnati's going to have to dive into their burned out, not very good bullpen. Doesn't look like a good situation there. And then on the other side, Jose Quintana is pitching for the Mets. An older dude, a junk pitcher, 35 years old, a guy that I have liked to fade, as you know me. This season, I've faded him a decent amount of times. 4.27 ERA, 1.32 whip. Not very good numbers on the season. 112-57 strikeout walk ratio is not impressive either. That's a low strikeout rate and too many walks and 145 and a third innings pitched. Doesn't allow that many hits, 135, but the rest of those numbers not good. Really putting a lot of guys on base. 22 home runs allowed isn't that great either. Doesn't come in and strike a lot of guys out. He had one decent stretch here in the month of July where I think I lost once or twice going against him. Actually, June and July, he put up some decent months there, but it seems like he's kind of returned to his not so good form. As in the month of August, he had a 5.63 ERA, gave up 32 hits in 32 innings. And what's more alarming is that he had a 22-17 strikeout walk ratio. So that is way too many walks. So he started getting a little bit wild again. Those recent numbers, not good for Jose Quintana, man. He faced a couple of good offenses in there, but faced some bad offenses too and didn't do particularly well against them either. So I think we're seeing the real Quintana again, where he's just not that great a pitcher. And up against the Reds, he doesn't have good stats against them either. 49 at-bat sample size, only a 6-4 strikeout walk ratio, and they have a 367 batting average against him and 946 OPS. So both of these starters, even though Eunice is only going to get you an opener, Quintana is actually a starter and will go probably an okay amount of innings in this game unless he gets knocked out early. But even if that happens, that's fine because it probably means there are runs being put on the board. So both pitchers have bad numbers against these opposing hitters. So that's the only play today. Oh, I forgot to put a banner up for it, but that's the only play today is the over in Cincinnati, New York Mets. The only play for baseball today for me. Over 8.5, and I got that straight up at -110 too, which it almost seems too easy to me. And when it seems too easy, it does concern me a little bit, but that's just where my handicapping of these games leads. Go check out my college football video, which is up. I did it last night where I went into detail about a bunch of those games. All 4 of my plays are up there in that video. Go check it out, man. College football starts in about an hour, so... And you can skip to the end if you want and then go back to the analysis later if you just want to see what my plays were quickly and then go back to it. And I mentioned them at the top of this show too. So let's get some wins, man, today. I got 5 plays on the board, 4 college football, 1 baseball. Let's get it done, man. So that over in baseball, then in college football, Army, South Carolina, East Carolina, and Texas Tech, all on the spread plus the points. Let's do it. Let's get it done. I'm Tower Gang Toad. Go watch Tower Gang. Check out the Tower Gang podcast and subscribe to the Patreon, man. Patreon.com/Tower Gang Pod, I believe is what it is. And you can find Tower Gang basically everywhere. We're everywhere, man. We're right behind you right now. Offensive comedy is where it's at. Peace.